to be asked and others not to be asked. When a question has already been posed to a witness and that witness is given an answer, it's not the practice of the court ever to allow the question to be asked again, a second or a third time. And so that's, again, just by way of explanation. Some questions that you ask call for responses that would be inadmissible under the Utah Rules of Evidence, and so you just need to understand that there will always be a screening process to the questions that you ask. Ms. Summers, there are several jury questions. Let me pose these to you, and then the attorneys will be able to follow up with any additional questions they have. Do you know what Michelle MacNeill's pre-marriage surname was?
Summers.
Do you know who appointed you as executor of the MacNeill estate?
I believe my dad is the one that drew up my mother's will.
What time was the phone call from the defendant about your mother not breathing and being in the tub?
I'd have to reference my phone records to make the specific one, but I believe it was about 10 o'clock Nevada time, which would be about 11 o'clock Utah time, but I'd have to look at the phone records to know the specific time.
What was your father's response when strike that. Let me ask you this other question. Did you leave on April 10th with the idea that your parents were leaving on a cruise on Sunday?
When my dad, can I explain it a little bit, or?
Well, right now it's just a yes or no question.
Okay. No.
Okay, and counsel may have some follow-up with you on that. Let me go back to this other question. Was the defendant present when Michelle MacNeill said that she didn't want to have him administering more medication to her?
He was not present at that time.
Okay, counsel, if you would just come up. Mr. Grunander, do you have follow-up questions on any of those issues?
Because you don't have your phone records in front of you. When we're talking about when you contacted your father with respect to your mom being in the bathtub and not breathing, we're talking about the time of day.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about Nevada time and Utah time. Yeah. Do you recall what that time was in thinking of your class schedule that day?
Let me just go over it in my head real quick. I can.
Do you know whether Ada was with your father at this time this phone call would have been made?
I didn't know that when I'd called, but I have found out that it was after she was picked up from school.
You know what time she got picked up from school?
I believe around 11:30-ish. So this may have been, and since that I found out that this happened, right as they got home from school. So probably be around 10:50-ish Vegas time, which would be about 11:50 approximately. But I know I have my phone records that show the specific time.
Did you have an understanding that when you talked to your father at this time that there was an ambulance or paramedics or law enforcement
that's
there?
what he told me. He said he said your mother's in the bathtub. She's not breathing. I've called an ambulance.
Okay. So that was the substance of the conversation.
Yeah, and then he hung up.
When you found out your mom was in trouble.
When she was in the bathtub, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Nothing further.
Okay. Would you like Ms. Summers to remain under subpoena for rebuttal?
Yes, please.
Ms. Summers, you'll remain under your trial subpoena, which means you may be invited back to give additional testimony. For today, you may step down. Thank you. Next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Gray.
Dr. Gray, if you'll come forward to the clerk's desk, please raise your right hand and be sworn.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the case happening before this court will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
Thank you. If you'll be seated to my left and respond to counsel's questions.
Morning.
Morning.
Will you please give us your name?
Todd Cameron Gray, G-R-E-Y.
Mr. Gray, what is your occupation?
I'm the chief medical examiner for the state of Utah.
And are you a physician?
Yes.
I can refer to you as Dr. Gray.
That would be nice, yes, thank you.
How long have you been the chief medical examiner for the state of Utah?
I was made chief in 1988. I came to Utah as an assistant medical examiner in 1986.
Prior to, well, let's just talk about general duties. What do you do as a medical examiner, generally speaking?
As a medical examiner, I'm a physician that is involved in the process of trying to come to conclusions about how people who die suddenly and unexpectedly met their death.
Okay. I'm going to get into a little bit of your background as far as schooling and experience.
Mm-hmm.
Bear with me on this. You're educated. Obviously, you're a doctor.
Yes.
Where did you start your education?
I received an undergraduate degree from Yale University. I went to medical school at Dartmouth Medical School. I was then trained in anatomic pathology at the University of California in San Diego and was trained in forensic pathology at the Dade County Medical Examiner's Office in Miami, Florida.
Forensic pathology. Will you describe what that is?
That is a subspecialty of pathology which, again, is focused on the investigation of sudden and unexpected death.
And what is pathology?
Pathology is a branch of medicine that essentially means the study of disease. So a pathologist is a person who, in anatomic pathology, looks at tissues, makes diagnoses about what's going wrong in the body. There's another branch of pathology called clinical pathology, which is more involved with lab tests and both conducting them and interpreting them.
You used the word disease. The common meaning for disease is some type of sickness or illness.
Or pathology, yes.
Okay. Describe what you mean by when you say disease. Is it a broad term?
It's a very broad term. It basically means some abnormality of either the structure or function of tissues.
Okay. I see, prior to working as a medical investigator in New Mexico. You worked for a Christian hospital, McKinley.
Actually, there was a period between when I left San Diego and went to Miami where my wife had to pay back a scholarship to the National Public Health Service. So while she was doing that, I worked in a small hospital in Gallup, New Mexico, as a hospital pathologist, doing things like looking at biopsies and making diagnoses.
Okay. Did you have a time when you worked at the ME's office, medical examiner's office in Dade County?
Yes, that was my training in forensic pathology.
Okay. And that's Dade County. Is that Florida?
That's Miami, Florida.
Okay. Do you have any experience in teaching in a professional capacity?
Yes. In addition to my role as the chief medical examiner, I'm also an associate clinical professor at the University of Utah Medical School. So I teach medical students and doctors in training in pathology about forensic pathology.
Did you have any teaching experience prior to the University of Utah?
Yes, I taught also when I was in Miami. That was also teaching medical students and residents.
Okay. Do you teach outside of an academic setting?
Yes.
And what is that?
I do presentations and lectures for a wide variety of folks who somehow interact with our office or who are involved in death investigations. So I will teach law enforcement officials, I will teach attorneys, both prosecutors and defense attorneys, nursing students, EMTs.
Okay. Do you carry any certifications?
Yes.
And what are those certifications?
I am board certified in anatomic and forensic pathology.
And can you describe what you have to do to become certified?
Board certification means that you have completed a approved course of study and then sat an examination and passed an examination in the field in which you are trying to become certified.
Is there an ongoing process to maintain certification?
No. The current, or at least for my generation of pathologists, you get certified once. We do not have to do a maintenance of certification.
Okay. Are you a member of any professional societies?
Yes.
And what are those?
I'm a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners, and I am also a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
Have you presented in the field of forensic pathology?
Yes.
Have you presented on the issue of determining the cause and manner of death?
Yes.
And what are those presentations? What have they amounted to, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, what I will talk about is, first off, what we do as pathologists in looking at bodies and finding out what happened to them. That would be the issue of cause of death. And then also talk about the process of assigning manner of death, whether this is a death which is considered natural, accident, homicide, suicide.
Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Are you published
Yes.
in the academic setting?
Yes, I have published both journal articles as well as chapters in textbooks.
When you talk about the publication of journal articles, is that a professional academic journal?
Yes.
What's
A peer-reviewed journal, yes.
peer-reviewed? Okay, that's where I'm getting at. Can you explain the difference between a peer-reviewed publication versus
Some other type
of publication? Yes.
A peer-reviewed journal or publication means that you have submitted this article. The editors will look at it and decide if they think it's interesting and worthy of publishing, and then it will be sent out to other experts in the field for their comments and criticisms. So it's a way of hopefully weeding out bad articles.
How does that process apply to textbook chapters?
It does not, usually.
Okay. Is there a screening process for textbook chapters?
It would be up to the editor of the textbook to decide if the content of that chapter or contribution was up to their standards.
Okay. And what kind of textbooks are these that you've been published in?
Let's see, there's a nursing school textbook about pathophysiology that I have contributed to in terms of injury pathology. There was not a full chapter, but I contributed in a textbook on child abuse.
Okay. Does the title Unintentional and Intentional Injuries in the Understanding Pathophysiology, if I've said that correctly?
That was the nursing school textbook, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Gray. Are you familiar with the case involving the decedent, Michelle MacNeill?
Yes.
In your profession, do you use the word decedent?
Yes.
Are there other terms that you could use, like patient?
Patient, victim, decedent, there's a number of different words that may be used.
Okay. I think for our purposes in this testimony, we'll refer to the decedent here as Michelle or the decedent.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Dr. Maureen Fricke?
Yes.
And who is Dr. Fricke?
Dr. Fricke was one of my associate or assistant medical examiners. So she was a forensic pathologist like me who worked at the medical examiner's office.
Is Dr. Fricke still a member of your office presently?
No, she died in 2008.
Okay. Are you aware of what she passed away from?
Yes.
And what was that?
Metastatic breast cancer.
Okay. How did you become involved in this case? Personally involved?
I became involved because after Maureen died, we essentially sort of handed out her cases among the other doctors of the office, and I was the one that by lot got this particular case to be in charge of any follow-up activities on.
Were there in fact follow-up activities?
Yes.
Okay. Did it amount to reopening the case, so to speak?
Part of it was a reassessment of cause and manner of death, which I undertook, yes.
Okay. Back to the role of a medical examiner, and you gave a brief description. Would you, again, just tell the jury what a medical examiner does?
Again, as I say, it's a doctor who is involved in the process of trying to understand how people who've died suddenly and unexpectedly came to meet their end.
Okay. Is the phrase immediate cause of death, what does that mean?
When we talk about cause of death, it's not just a single thing. It can have various temporal steps. The immediate cause of death would be sort of essentially the final straw, the last thing that went wrong, the last disease or pathology that led to this death. You may also have what are called intervening or intermediate causes of death, which describe the process that led to that final immediate event. And then there may be an underlying cause of death, which is a determination of what sort of set the whole ball rolling downhill.
Is there a difference between cause of death and mechanism of death?
Yes.
What's the difference there?
Cause of death is a enumeration or description of the disease or pathology that caused death. Mechanism of death refers more to the physiology of dying, the failure of function that may have resulted from a cause of death.
Okay. And manner of death. What does the term manner mean?
Manner of death is an opinion that we render which puts the death into a classification which may include natural, meaning the death is due to some sort of natural disease process, accidental, meaning that it is due to an unexpected and untoward event, suicide, meaning that it's the result of an intentional action by the person that meant to kill themselves, homicide, meaning it's the result of an intentional action by another person, or undetermined, meaning we cannot make a clear distinction.
Do you deal with a certain level of proof or certainty in your profession when you're making these determinations?
We do the best we can, and we try to achieve what is called a level of medical certainty.
Okay. You discussed a possible manner of death. I guess it's the lack of being able to attribute a manner of death as undetermined.
That is correct.
If a medical examiner makes the finding that someone's death is undetermined, the manner, does that necessarily mean it wasn't the result of an accident
No,
or a suicide
no,
or homicide
no,
or naturally caused?
no.
Okay.
It means we can't be sure.
Okay. When attempting to determine the cause of death and the manner of death, what do you as a medical examiner, what are you looking for or looking at?
So the process of determining both cause and manner of death relies on as much information as you can get. Obviously, looking at the body, doing the examination, doing testing on the body gives you information that is certainly relevant to cause of death, what disease or pathology led to death. In terms of making a decision about manner of death, you are going to need investigative information, information that tells you about the circumstances surrounding that individual's death that may put it into context.
Is a medical examiner concerned with, well, in the instance of a homicide, if there's a determination that someone died due to a homicide, is a medical examiner interested in assigning responsibility or culpability?
No, the determination of manner of death as homicide is essentially a medical opinion which says this person died as the result of an intentional action by another person. It does not attempt to make a judgment about culpability or motivation. It just says this person died because this other person did X, Y, or Z.
Your Honor, if I might approach,
You may.
and then just make a record. I'm holding the state exhibits 49, 50, and 51. I'm going to have the witness identify these and then by way of stipulation offer them.
Very good.
Dr. Graham, handing you exhibits 49, 50, and 51. Will you just briefly look at those?
All right, so exhibit number 49 is a copy of the autopsy report that was written and signed by Dr. Fricke. Of note, it does not include the toxicology report that was also part of her findings and determinations.
Okay.
50 is a copy of the amended autopsy report, which includes both her opinion and then my opinion about cause and manner of death.
Is there a date on that, on the amended?
Yes, I signed the amended report on October 6th of 2010. Again, noting that this does not include a copy of the toxicology report.
You have a date on Dr. Fricke's report, Exhibit 49. when that was signed by her?
She signed that one on May 22nd of 2007.
Okay.
Exhibit 51 is a copy of a series of different documents from the medical examiner file, including a toxicology request form, a body inventory and release sheet, an autopsy worksheet, a body diagram with handwritten notations in Dr. Fricke's handwriting, noting findings on the body at the time she did the examination. And then there are a series of handwritten notes about looks like telephone conversations and other interactions that Dr. Fricke had in relation to this case.
Are there portions of those notes that have been redacted out?
Yes, it looks like there are some blackouts on a number of different pages.
Okay. You mentioned Dr. Fricke's handwriting. You're familiar with her handwriting?
Yes.
And how so?
I have seen myriad exemplars of her handwriting.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 33. It's already been admitted by the court. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is that?
This is a copy of the toxicology report form that was received by my office concerning the findings in Michelle MacNeill.
Is that the report that you're referring to, which has not been attached to?
That is correct.
Okay. To Exhibits 49 and 50.
That is correct.
Was that toxicology report relied upon in coming to the findings in the autopsy reports?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned, I believe you mentioned that Dr. Fricke did the autopsy in this case.
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what an autopsy is and the process of performing an autopsy?
Certainly. So an autopsy is an examination of a patient conducted after death. It has a number of different parts. The first part would be a careful external examination, looking at the outside of the body, documenting any evidence of disease, injury, or other notable findings. Then it would proceed to an internal examination where the body organs are first inspected in situ in the body, then removed and dissected to see if there's any evidence of disease or other abnormality.
Did Dr. Fricke go through that process with Michelle MacNeill?
Yes, she performed a complete autopsy.
And do you have a date on which she would have performed that autopsy?
It is recorded that this examination was conducted on April 12th of 2007, commencing at 2:15 p.m.
Are you aware of, you came in with a binder today? Mm-hmm. And what is that?
That is the case file of all of the materials that we have collected and are saving in this particular case.
Are the documents that have been introduced here in court? Your Honor, I would move for admission of 49, 50, and 51.
No objection.
49, 50, and 51 are received.
Thank you. Exhibits 49, 50, 51, and 33, are those included in your case file?
Yes.
Okay. What other kind of documents make up your case file?
There would be, there's some discs of photographs on CD. There are medical records that were gathered from various practitioners relating to Michelle's treatment. There are documents that have been submitted from your office and your investigators for our review and consideration.
Okay. Have you received any reports from defense counsel in this matter that would make up part of your file?
There was, let's see, was there a report from...
There's no need to identify them specifically.
Yeah, I can't remember if they're in the file or not. I have seen reports from defense experts, but I can't remember if we put copies in the file.
Is there information in the file that was received after Dr. Fricke performed the autopsy and actually signed the report?
Yes.
Okay. Generally speaking, what kinds of information was received subsequent to that?
The majority of the information would be investigative information.
Okay. Did Dr. Fricke form an opinion as to Michelle MacNeill's cause of death?
Yes.
And what was her opinion?
Dr. Fricke certified that Michelle died as a result of cardiovascular disease with hypertension or high blood pressure and myocarditis or inflammation of the heart.
What language does she use in her conclusion with respect to the cause of death?
She, in her opinion, what she says is that Michelle MacNeill appears to have died as the consequence of natural cardiovascular disease.
With respect to the word appears, does that have any significance in your experience?
It would indicate that the person who is certifying this death thinks that the underlying disease process is significant enough to have caused death, but the specific mechanism of death may not be clear.
Okay. Can you describe what chronic hypertension is?
That would be high blood pressure and the concomitant effects on the body.
What about myocarditis?
That is inflammation of the heart, essentially. It can either be from infection or other causes that lead to the body sending white cells into the heart as if there is damage or disease there that they have to respond to.
And how does one find myocarditis?
That is usually a diagnosis made by microscopic exam. So when we do the autopsy, we may look at the heart and not be able to say, oh, this is a heart that has myocarditis. But if we make thin sections, put them on glass, stain them, and look at it under the microscope, we can see changes that indicate there are inflammatory cells in the muscle of the heart. And that's what myocarditis is.
Okay. And can you describe, you've talked about what myocarditis is, but how does that result in causing someone's death?
There are a number of ways myocarditis can kill you. If it is overwhelming and severe, it may actually lead to your heart muscle just not functioning at all, so that essentially your heart cannot pump. It can, in more mild forms, lead to disruptions or abnormalities in the transmission of electrical signals through your heart that controls the ordered contraction of the heart. So normal beating of the heart, it may lead to an interruption of that process.
Okay. Are you aware of how serious, or can you give us a level as to Michelle's hypertension?
The changes in her heart that were, and other parts of her body that were indicative of her having high blood pressure, I would call mild to moderate.
With respect to the myocarditis, how serious or not serious was the myocarditis that was observed?
It was not very severe. It was not very extensive.
When it comes to diagnosing hypertension first, is there room for debate with respect to hypertension, or maybe explain that a little bit?
Okay. There's two sides of that coin. The first is you go to your doctor and the doctor takes a blood pressure reading and they say, whoa, your blood pressure is 180 over 120. You've got hypertension. That is a determination based on a measure of the actual pressure in your vascular system. When obviously my patients don't have any blood pressure at all, and when I do a diagnosis of hypertension or hypertensive cardiovascular disease, I am looking for signs that indicate this is a heart that has been working a lot harder, keeping up that higher pressure, and then looking at other parts of the body to see if I can see evidence that these areas have suffered from a chronic pounding of higher pressure in their blood vessels.
Is that evidence when you look at the body?
Yes.
Is it relatively available to see if someone's been suffering from hypertension?
Yes, it is something that you can see both with your naked eye and just by looking at the heart, looking at, say, the kidneys. It is also something that may have signs that show up when you look at the tissue under the microscope.
Thank you. Turning to myocarditis, could a diagnosis of myocarditis be contested?
Yes.
And how so? Or could you describe that a little bit more?
Particularly in mild forms of myocarditis, there's a number of issues. First off, you may have sampling bias in the sense of not every piece or area of the heart will show the same level of changes or infiltration of inflammatory cells. You may also have a disagreement between knowledgeable experts saying whether there are enough of these cells in a particular area to be worthy of the diagnosis of myocarditis.
In talking about the general medical examiner community, particularly in a mild case of myocarditis, would there be room for a difference of opinion as to making that diagnosis among competent medical examiners?
Certainly.
Okay. Have you, in your work as a medical examiner, you're part of a few boards, professional societies?
Yes.
Do you ever have occasion to attend seminars or participate in some kind of organization where there's debate in determining a decedent's cause of death?
That's probably not the best way to phrase it. Certainly I have been involved in the process of reviewing other doctors' work where they have made diagnoses. I have come along and looked at the same evidence that they have looked at, and I've said, maybe, or no, I don't agree with that. Doesn't mean that I think they're incompetent. It just means we have a different interpretation of the significance of different findings.
And those findings would go to the cause of death, diagnosing that?
Yes.
Okay. Can myocarditis be misdiagnosed?
Yes.
Okay. You indicated that you have reviewed other medical examiners' findings, and you may not totally support them or you may disagree with those findings.
Yes.
Can you talk about changing changing a diagnosis as far as cause of death? Does that happen, and what are the circumstances around that?
Okay. So, changing your opinion as to the cause of death, that can happen if, number one, you get more information. Let's say you did not originally look at the thing, at an organ or a tissue under the microscope. Then a question is raised, you go back, look at the tissue under the microscope, you may certainly find something that you had not been aware of previously, and that may lead to a change in the determination of the cause of death. Cause of death may also change based solely on new investigative information with no specific changes in what you see in the body. And if you'd like, I can provide you with an example.
I would appreciate that, yes.
For example, let's say we get a report that a little baby...
I'm going to object to the example. I think he's answered the question.
Sustained.
Okay.
Dr. Gray, in your experience, are you able to provide an example to give context as to the process in changing an opinion as to the cause of death, which is investigative related to an investigation?
Yes.
Will you please provide an example?
Your Honor, same objection. I think examples are not necessary. It's just comparing other cases.
Help me understand this. Yeah, come on.
We've talked about changing the cause of death. How frequent in your experience is it that the cause of death has changed?
Changing cause of death is pretty rare, particularly if you have done a complete examination originally.
Okay. Turning to well, first, the cause of death here. We talked about the cause of death with respect to Michelle MacNeill. Did Dr. Fricke make a determination as to the manner of death?
Yes.
And what was that?
She said that the manner of death was natural.
Okay. With respect to determining the manner of death of a decedent, can that be subject to debate among competent professionals?
Certainly.
And please explain why.
Manner of death is not necessarily a diagnosis based on specific criteria that you can extract from the body itself. It is an opinion that is arrived at after consideration of as much evidence as you can get about the circumstances surrounding that person's death.
Is there certain information that's relied upon maybe more than other kinds of information?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
If there's an eyewitness to an event that leads to someone's death?
That would certainly have significant weight. It would not necessarily be absolutely probative, depending on the reliability of the witness and the information that they give. I mean, I may have an eyewitness say X, Y, and Z happened, but then from the body, it's very obvious that neither X or Z could have happened.
Okay. What about evidence of motive? If you're looking at a potential homicide and information is brought to you that there was motive to kill someone, and you're looking at that someone, that decedent.
It gives you pause, certainly.
Gives you pause, and can you elaborate on that?
Basically, it means, is this what appeared to be straightforward and simple originally something that is much more complicated? You wonder, is something else going on here? If there is motive, may not necessarily change your mind, but it makes you think.
Evidence of motive in a homicide investigation would not reflect in the examination of a body, correct?
No.
Okay. Were you, Dr. Gray, at some point asked to review Dr. Fricke's conclusions in this case?
Yes.
Do you recall the process of that, how it came about?
Yes.
And what was that process?
Essentially, an investigator from, I believe, your office.
Was that the Utah County Attorney's Office?
The Utah County Attorney's Office began to develop an investigation which raised questions as to whether something more than a straightforward natural death was at play in this case.
Okay. Was this a back and forth discussion for some time?
Yes.
Okay. Were you provided additional information?
Yes.
And what kinds of information?
It was essentially investigative information that raised questions about whether the initial report that we had concerning the circumstances around Michelle's death was complete and accurate. There were questions as to motive for a possible homicide in this case. It was a process of essentially raising questions that may not have been originally known or considered.
Okay. Did you ultimately form an opinion as to the cause of death of Michelle MacNeill?
Yes, I amended the cause of death in this case and added, in addition to cardiovascular disease, the possibility that drug toxicity may have played a role as well.
And what was the basis for the changing the cause of death?
Essentially, it was the, number one, re-looking at the toxicology report, thinking about those findings, and weighing those findings in the face of other investigative information that was provided.
Turning to Exhibit 33, the toxicology report, can you just briefly describe what drugs were found active in Michelle MacNeill's system?
The toxicology report indicated that diazepam or Valium was in her system. The breakdown product of Valium, nordiazepam, was there. She had oxycodone, promethazine, and zolpidem also in her system.
Zolpidem, Ambien.
Ambien is the common brand name, yes.
You referred to nordiazepam, the breakdown of diazepam.
It is a metabolite of diazepam, yes.
The fact that that metabolite was present, does that indicate anything to you?
Couple of things could be possible. It could be that it meant that the person had taken diazepam and it had been in their system long enough for that process of conversion from the original diazepam into the metabolite diazepam had occurred. Nordiazepam can also be, you can get that as an prescription itself, so you could have ingested nordiazepam as well as Valium. Those are the possibilities.
if the nordiazepam is a product of the diazepam, is that drug metabolized or filtered through the liver?
Yes, liver would be one of the sites of metabolism.
Okay. Would that suggest functioning of the liver?
Yes.
With respect to the, may I retrieve the exhibit?
You may.
I almost wonder if this would be a good time to break.
Okay, much longer will you be with Dr. Gray?
Half hour.
Would you like to break now or half an hour from now for lunch? You'd like to keep going? All right, let's keep going until direct is done, and then we'll break for lunch.
Promethazine?
Mm-hmm.
What's the generic name of promethazine?
Generic is promethazine. A common brand name would be Phenergan.
Phenergan, okay. Is that an anti-nausea?
Yes, that's its most common use.
Does it have other uses as well?
Yes, and I can't remember exactly.
Okay. There's a symbol with respect to the quantity that's there.
Yes, on
Wiggly line.
on the first page of Exhibit 33, the last line reads blood parentheses heart quant-GC/MS promethazine, and then a whatever that wiggly sign that says approximate is 0.1 milligrams per liter.
And you said approximate?
That's what that symbol means, is approximate.
Okay. With respect to your cause of death, determination here, essentially there's a cardiovascular disease in combination with drug toxicity.
Your Honor, I'm sorry. Can I object in relation to foundation in relation to his testimony about promethazine? I think in light of what we've learned that the testimony is confusing without explanation.
I can try and lay some foundation.
Yeah, before we move on, that's all I'm.
In what ways the foundation lacking?
Because their toxicology report doesn't actually mean approximately 0.1.
Well, that he may interpret the report. Sustained as to foundation, you may lay more and see if that addresses your concern. Go ahead.
Have you become aware of some dispute as to what the approximate sign may mean?
Yes.
And what is that, Dr. Gray, as far as what you've become aware of?
I have not seen any actual written discussion of it, but through telephone conversations with a member of your staff, I was told that the toxicologist is stating that the approximate sign means that this is not actually a nearly exact level. It means that it is less than that and could be anything from 0 on up.
Okay. Is it your understanding that it was detected in the blood?
Yes.
The amount is in question.
Yes.
As part of your opinion, you found there to be drug toxicity.
Yes.
Can you explain what drug toxicity means?
Essentially, it just means that the effects of the drugs may have played a role in this person's death.
Okay. With respect to the question as to the approximate amount of promethazine,
Yes.
does that change your opinion as to drug toxicity here?
No.
And why not?
Because even if you say this level with its approximate indicator is inaccurate, I still think that overall the toxicology findings were significant enough for me to include them as a potential factor in Michelle's death.
Can you provide the jury with an opinion or context with respect to the promethazine versus the other substances found in her system, the effect on a human body?
The promethazine has different effects on the body from the other three drugs. Diazepam and its metabolite, oxycodone, and zolpidem all have depressive effects on brain function. Basically, it can make your brain slow down. Promethazine is not known as a central nervous system depressant in the way that the other three drugs are.
Okay. Are you able to give an opinion as to if it was from 1 down to 4, considering those 4 drugs? Is there one that affects the central nervous depressant system more, and then second and third?
Probably the oxycodone is the one that would have the greatest potential for central nervous system depression effects.
Is that also known as Percocet as well?
Yes, that would be another common brand name. Zolpidem and diazepam are both the same class of drugs called benzodiazepines. They would have similar effects. I mean, zolpidem is designed to make you go to sleep. Valium is designed to calm you down.
You indicated that the promethazine is not a CNS depressant in the same way as
That is
compared to
correct.
the other drugs. Can you elaborate on that?
In what sense?
The effect it has as a CNS depressant versus the others.
Well, it's an antiemetic, so it certainly affects the brain. Antiemetic means stop you from vomiting, stop you from feeling nauseous, but it is not the same class of drugs, and as far as I'm aware, does not affect the same systems in the brain as the other three.
There is a depressant effect, but different.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you describe the relationship between the drug toxicity finding and the cardiovascular disease as how they would work together, resulting in someone's death?
Certainly. What we're getting towards is the issue of mechanism of death. In Dr. Fricke's original report, she says that the cardiovascular disease probably led to a mechanism called arrhythmia, abnormal beating of the heart, leading to a loss of blood pressure, loss of consciousness, and death. In looking at the toxicology results, it is certainly possible that CNS depression could lead to a arrhythmogenic effect on the body that would play into the problems that could arise from her heart disease. It's also possible that drug intoxication could have led to sedation or even a loss of consciousness in and of itself.
Is an arrhythmia a cause of death or a mechanism of death?
That's a mechanism of death.
Okay. How does one diagnose an arrhythmia?
It's an abnormality of function in a living person. So you would have to monitor that living person's heart rate and EKG and see if they are developing an abnormal rhythm or abnormal beating. After death, it leaves no specific footprints that a pathologist can come along and see and say, oh, look, that is evidence that this person had an arrhythmia.
Okay. In other words, a medical examiner could not diagnose as arrhythmia as, number one, a cause of death.
It would not be a valid cause of death. It would be substituting a mechanism for a cause.
Do you have an opinion with respect to the drug toxicity, whether the drugs alone may have caused Michelle MacNeill's death?
Unlikely, in the sense that, let's say, this same toxicology report came back on someone who had a absolutely pristine, clean autopsy, no evidence of any kind of disease or abnormality. Again, depending on the circumstances surrounding that death, I would probably be hard-pressed to say, I know exactly what killed them. I would probably use some sort of hedge in my diagnosis, say possible drug toxicity as a cause of death, but I wouldn't be absolutely certain that with those levels, that was independently enough to cause death.
Those levels of drugs, when determining manner of death, when drug toxicity is in play, are there certain levels you're looking for that would indicate something that might be a suicide or a homicide?
Yes, again, the interpretation of the toxicology findings would be dependent on information about how they came to be. You see a drug level that's very high, and you're also told, oh, this is a person who's been depressed, and there was a note at the scene saying, essentially, goodbye, cruel world. I'd probably call that a suicide. So the interpretation of levels is dependent on what you know about how those came to be.
Okay, thank you. Are there limitations on a medical examiner when attempting to determine cause of death?
Certainly.
What kinds of limitations are those?
The limitations basically all relate to how good is the information you have, how complete is the information that you have, and your ability to interpret that information to come to a conclusion.
Okay. With respect to the manner of death, what limitations?
Obviously, for manner of death, it's an opinion. Again, it is not something that is based on specific findings that you can enumerate and say, aha, that has to be X, Y, or Z. Your opinion, again, is only as good as the totality of the information that you are given and that you base that opinion upon.
Is there an exact formula with respect to determining the manner of death of a decedent?
Not that I'm aware of, and certainly not that I've ever been taught.
Are you weighing positive and negative information?
You're weighing all the information you can.
Are conclusions open to interpretation?
Certainly.
Would you say that there are built-in limitations when determining the manner of death of a decedent?
I guess I need to know more specifically what you're getting at. I don't know what you're saying.
I think we've kind of covered the general area.
Okay.
I was asking for. Is medicine a science?
Not really.
Why would you say that?
Because in both clinical medicine as well as what I do in postmortem medicine, you are never going to have absolutely complete and irrefutably accurate data. Everything is based on your, essentially, the best information you can, with the understanding that it may not actually be 100% true all the time, 100% complete all the time. And that's where a skilled doctor or skilled clinician weighs as much as they can, both from their knowledge and their experience, to come up with a plan or a diagnosis.
Have you considered, as a cause of death here, drowning?
Yes.
Okay. And what's your opinion as to that being the cause of Michelle MacNeill's death?
It's a possibility, based on all of the information that's been presented that I have seen, but I could not make that diagnosis with absolute certainty based, again, on what I have, both from the autopsy and from other information.
Would that be a conclusion if someone were to determine she died of drowning as a cause of death? You mentioned that would be a possibility.
Yes.
With respect to that determination and your determination of cause of death, is that open to some debate? Reasonable debate?
Yeah, certainly I think that somebody could look at, again, all of the information in this case and say, well, I think it weighs up enough for me to say this is a drowning death. That, again, is a matter of interpretation, and you may see differences between different experts in terms of how they come to that conclusion.
Were you provided information in this case as to some alleged statements by the defendant to others?
Yes.
Involving the cause and manner of death of Michelle MacNeill?
Yes.
What effect, if any, did those statements have on you in your analysis in this case?
It certainly was, they certainly were another series of pieces of information that raised a question as to whether this was a simple, straightforward, natural death. I did not find them overwhelmingly probative in any way.
Okay. If you were to consider the substance of what those statements were, is what's being described in those statements consistent with what could have happened to Michelle MacNeill?
To some extent, yes.
And to what extent?
Objection, Your Honor.
I would,
I'm sorry, don't answer. Would you approach on this, please? The objection on the ground of speculation is overruled. You may pose a hypothetical question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Gray, if you were to learn that the defendant told somebody or others that he had...
Your Honor, that's the same objection, the way the question is being phrased. There's no hypothetical.
Overruled. It's a hypothetical question. Go ahead.
If you were to learn that the defendant here had told somebody or others that he had drugged up Michelle MacNeill and convinced her to get into the tub and held her down for a little bit, and it caused her death, would that scenario be consistent with how Michelle MacNeill may have died here?
Yes, certainly it's possible.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Would you like to break at this time, Mr. Spencer, or how long?
Yes, I'd like to break.
Okay. We'll be in recess until 1:35. Well, by the time you get out of the building, let's have you come back at 1:40. Please keep in mind my prior admonition to you. You're not to form or express any opinion about the case till it's finally submitted to you. It's your duty not to discuss any subject of the trial with anyone else. Don't do any research on your own. Avoid any media coverage of the trial. Court's in recess.